Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's session called Black Concert Lives Matter. I'd like to thank you all for attending this session, and we're going to start. I'd like to start by introducing the person who's going to introduce our moderator for the day. Dr. Charles Lwanga is an ethnomusicologist, composer, theorist, and percussionist. His research in ethnomusicology examines the role of popular music in transforming Uganda's public sphere into a participatory arena. As a composer, Lwanga's creative output is grounded through the lenses of interculturalism, creative musicology, and African pianism. Lwanga holds a PhD in ethnomusicology 2020 and a PhD in composition theory 2012, both awarded by the University of Pittsburgh. He holds an MA in composition theory 2006, a postgraduate diploma in music education, a BA in music, and a diploma in law. He has just joined the faculty of the University of Michigan, so I want to thank him for participating in his inaugural event as a faculty member. Thank you, and Professor Lwanga.
Thank you so much, Professor Toppin. Now, it is my honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce Dr. Dwight Andrews, composer, musician, educator, and minister. He joined the Emory College faculty in 1987. A native of Detroit, Dr. Andrews is professor of music theory and African American music at the Emory University and senior minister of First Congregational United Church of Christ in Atlanta. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in music from the University of Michigan. He continued his studies at Yale University, receiving a master's of divinity degree and a doctor of philosophy in music theory. While at Yale, Dr. Andrews served as associate pastor of Christ's Church and was on the faculty of the music department and African American Studies program for over 10 years. He also served as the resident music director between 1979 and 1986 at the Yale Repertory Theater under Lloyd Richards. It was during this period that his fruitful association with playwright August Wilson began. As a result, Dr. Andrews served as music director for the Broadway productions of August Wilson's Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Fences, The Piano Lesson, and Seven Guitars. He also served as music director for the Broadway revival production of Ma Rainey, starring Charles Dutton and Whoopi Goldberg, and collaborated with director Kenny Leon on the Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun, starring Sean Combs and Felicia Rashad. His work has been presented at professional theaters throughout the United States and Great Britain. Dr. Andrews' film credits include the PBS Hollywood's The Old Settler, directed by Debbie Allen, and starring Felicia Rashad, Louis Messiah's documentary films, Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, A Biography in Four Voices, and Louis Alon Thompson. In her own words, Charlene Gilbert's Homecoming, the Hallmark Hall of Fame's The Piano Lesson, the HBO's Miss Eva's Boys, and the theme for the PBS documentary on African American contributions to the arts in the 20th century entitled I'll Make Me a World. In addition, Dr. Andrews has served as a multi-instrumentalist sideman on over 25 jazz and new music albums with various artists including Anthony Braxton, Anthony Davis, James Newton, Wadada Smith, and Jay Hogarth. He recently appeared as a sideman on Andy Bay's Grammy-nominated American song, Savoy, and Jerry Allen's The Life of a Song, Telak. Dr. Andrews is presently working on a study of Black music and race based on his Harvard lectures and a manuscript on spirituality in the works of John Coltrane, Mary Williams, Sun Ra, Dave Brubeck, and Albert Eller. In addition, Dr. Andrews is editing a collection of critical essays on African-American composer William Levy Dawson. These essays were part of a major symposium exploring the legacy of William Dawson, which Andrews presented at Emory University in 2005. In addition, Dr. Andrews curated a special program celebrating the opening of the Romer Baden exhibition at the High Museum in Atlanta. The event, entitled Baden's Blues and Other Colors, featured Bradford's Marsalis and his quartet, as well as actors Carl Gordon and Emmy Award winners Charles Dutton and Epertha Mackinson. Andrews is the recipient of numerous awards, including a 2005 Luxus Leader of the Arts Award, a Pew Trust TCG Artist Residency Fellowship, a Mellon Fellowship, Emory's University Distinguished Teacher Award, and the Yale Tercentenary Medal for the Yale Club of Georgia. Dr. Andrews was the artistic director of the National Black Arts Festival between 1996 and 1998. And in 1997, he was named the first Quincy Jones Visiting Professor of African American Music at Harvard University. Dr. Andrews was a guest visiting professor of composition at the Yale School of Music in 2003 and gave the 2004 Alain Locke Lectures at Harvard. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Professor Dwight Andrews.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor, for that very, very detailed bio. I really appreciate that. I think the only thing you left out was that I was also a Cub Scout, but thank you for that very fluid introduction. I'm very, very pleased to be with all of you today. It's really an honor to be a part of this great weekend conference. And it's also great to be a part of what I think to be a very important legacy of artists and educators who are part and who have become a part of our musical landscape precisely because of Willis Patterson. This is truly a very historic and important, perhaps transformative moment in the life of our nation and in our world. And so I'm really pleased that we get a chance to ask these important questions at this very, very important time. My challenge is to simply be the moderator of this panel and to facilitate a conversation with our wonderful panelists, as well as with all of you who are tuned in. The format for our afternoon is very simple. Each of our four panelists will be introduced by me, and then they will share their thoughts and perhaps some musical examples from their work that they think are pertinent. And after each of those 4 10 to 12-minute presentations, we're going to allow time for our participants to speak with each other and then go into a Q&A with all of you. I'm very, very pleased and honored that we have 4 very, very special artists, educators, thinkers, and what I would call influencers today, including Bill Banfield, Anthony Green, Ashley Gordon, and Marquise Carter. They're going to share their thoughts on this very important topic, Black Concert Lives Matter. And I do think it's important to set the context for this conversation this afternoon. As you've read in the program booklet, this is a very, very important point in our nation where we're talking about Black Lives Matter. It's a very, very unusual, if not singular, political season that gets more and more intense day by day. And the various epidemics of the pandemic, the economic crisis, the police brutality that we are all experiencing has really pushed the boundaries of all of us to think not only what it is, but how we do it. So in the midst of all of this turmoil, I think there is a great opportunity to have a conversation about culture, art, and the centrality of the African-American experience for all of the Americas and to 20th century art and music. The description of our afternoon begins in the 1940s, the Double V campaign and the push for civil rights in the 1960s, and the Black Power movement. And all of these important social movements were, of course, accompanied by music. We could even go back a few decades to the Harlem Renaissance, which itself was not just an artistic movement, but also a political movement. So music has always accompanied our struggle and our quest for social justice and for equality and for acceptance in this larger world. And so we want to allow each of our presenters to give their take on this important transformative moment and speak to how Black art and life matters. I do want to say that this gives us some pretty provocative opportunities because the notion of art music itself is probably one that we need to revisit if we're going to be more inclusive of the African American contribution. But not only that, public discourse around art in general in America has been very, very limited and often skewed. So at a time when all of our cultural institutions are reevaluating where does African American contribution belong, I think this gives us a wonderful way to raise the important questions and make some transformative suggestions about the way forward. Most importantly, because we're at the University of Michigan, where I studied and was trained, I think that this is a very important moment for the Academy to deal with its own intellectual integrity and honesty about the place of Black culture and Black art, not at the margin of American life and Western life, but at the center of it, at least in the beginnings of, from the beginning of the 20th century. So I'm hoping that as we hear from these artists today, we'll be able to circle back around and raise some important questions and perhaps even some recommendations of how we can move forward. I've been struck by the fact that virtually all of the presentations have talked about the ways in which Black art music, Black people have been at the margin of our conversations about our time. And perhaps we need to begin in the Academy by providing some leadership to make sure that our scholarship is true to the realities of Black contributions. Having said all of that, I think I want to get right to our first presenter, who is Marquise Carter. And I want to just tell you a little bit about Marquise so that we can get right to our presentations the afternoon. Marquise is a tenor scholar and teacher, and he has distinguished himself as a voice for change in the world of concert music. His research on the art songs of Florence Price have been featured in numerous forums, including the Society for American Music Conferences and the New York Times. He is not only a scholar and teacher and singer, but he's a wonderful recitalist who has performed works throughout the United States. And he really is a very distinguished new and young voice on the scene today. And I think one of the great moments that we can celebrate is the way in which this weekend is bringing generations of scholars together. I'm feeling a little bit like a fossil because I was a graduate student in the 1985 program at Michigan. And when I came to Michigan under Willis Patterson's tutelage, it was 1969. And the ground had shifted literally. And so to see this arc and to see these voices coming to the fore, I think is very, very important. And I'm very excited about it. Marquise is on the faculty of Murray State University, where he teaches music, history, and voice. So we welcome Dr. Marquise Carter. Welcome, and we give the floor to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andrews, and thank you so much, Dr. Toppin, for what has been a fantastic symposium. I'm already feeling refreshed and renewed and have so many ideas about how I'm going to implement a lot of the discourses that I'm engaged with through this symposium. So thank you for continuing this work. It's my pleasure today to be here representing not only Murray State University, but also the International Florence Price Festival, a festival of which I'm very privileged and happy to be the president of. And so it's my goal in my time I've been allotted today to talk a little bit about myself and the various ways that I have interacted with this idea of Black concert life and how it ties into social justice movements. Personally, as a singer, my path to discovering Black art song and particularly discovering the works of Florence Price, I is actually regrettably late that I encountered music by African American composers. And I always talk to my students about how important it was to me when I did encounter the first African American art songs that I had performed in my juries and on recitals. And it was through Dr. Patterson's anthology of art song that I first became introduced to the works of Florence Price. And that marks a turning point in my own career, because it was when I started to see that I, as a Black man, had a place in classical music, and that I wasn't alone. I was not the first, but that I could actually fit into and see myself as part of a lineage of barrier breakers and folks who had used art music and all types of music to create new pathways for African Americans in the greater cultural landscape of the United States. So as far as my work as a singer, one of the ways that I've engaged with social justice and has been important to me has been to create platforms and opportunities for my students and for myself to sing music by Black composers. And part of that has been to create performing opportunities. And so at Georgia Southern University, when I was there, I had the pleasure of starting the celebration of African American music and producing a weekend concert series where we not only featured Black concert artists as masterclass technicians, but we actually we staged a recital of Florence Price's songs, and that's the entire song book, about 45 art songs and spirituals, 44 art songs and spirituals. The published book that from, oh, his name is escaping me, it's going to come back to me, but the published series, the 44 art songs and spirituals of Florence Price, we were able to produce almost the entirety of that anthology in a concert with those students. And I can't begin to explain how important it was, particularly to the African American students, but even the students who were not from marginalized communities, for them to encounter this music and to see how rich it was. Thank you, Dr. Toppin. Richard Hurd's anthology of art songs and spirituals of Florence Price. So as a teacher, it's always been important to me to make sure that I decenter the white gaze and the narrative of white centrality as we talk about the history of Western music, and particularly if we just talk about the history of American music. And so one way has been creating these performance opportunities. As a musicologist, it's always been one of my central goals to decenter the white patriarchal gaze and the way that we talk about histories of music. And so when I began to explore the art songs of Florence Price, it became so important to me to contextualize Florence Price within the context of Chicago, the New Negro movement, the Black Arts Renaissance, and talking about how Florence Price was not only writing music as an artist, but she was writing it as particularly a Black woman negotiating her positionality, how her works engage with feminist thoughts. I think specifically of her art song, The Washerwoman, that speaks directly to the problem of Black women's domestic labor during the 1930s and 40s, and the problems of access and the problems of economic entrapment, not being able to find a way to climb the socioeconomic ladder. And one of the things that's been important in that is in each of my scholarly activities has been to figure out what are these hidden stories, who are the hidden figures or the forgotten figures who have not been canonized, and to find ways to recanonize them. And so in my music history classes, it looks like teaching Chevalier de Saint-Georges next to Mozart. It looks like talking about George Bridgetower as we talk about the Kreutzer Sonatas. And it looks like introducing my students to Black feminist critique of the likes of Bell Hooks as they engage with music in context. And then finally, I know I'm running out of time, but I wanted to end with talking about Florence Price Festival. I'm so proud of the work that we're doing as a young nonprofit. And 4 of the goals that we have are: 1, creating platforms that feature Black artists; 2, opening pathways for new Black composers. We're working on a variety of initiatives to not only commission composers in the future, but also just feature their works on our yearly festival. Finding ways to advocate for change in the way that we canonize the repertoire of Black composers, and awarding new works in the composition and performance. So finding ways to make sure that we're centering the narratives and the lives and the great work of Black women composers and artists and educators and leaders. So we were pleased this year to be able to present our first inaugural festival, and unfortunately COVID-19 forced our festival online, but one of the beautiful outpourings of that was the reach that we were able to get with the virtual festival. And we actually had in a few minutes, I'm going to share an excerpt from one of our most widely viewed sessions, which was a session on art song, which featured Dr. Daryl Taylor and Dr. Christine Jobson. And one of the beautiful things about that festival is, one, all the programming was picked by a panel of all women, persons of color. And so I've always made it a point to make sure that my goal, that as we're talking about Black women in context and advocating for their works, that Black women are part of making those decisions and central to it. And so I'm pleased to say that all of the programming was chosen by women of color and primarily Black women. We also were able to showcase a variety of types of performances, from solo recitals, from student performers, all the way to a chamber concert with corresponding Q&A with Apollo chamber players. And so I'm going to ask Dr. Toppin to actually share an excerpt from this panel. And I'm sharing this particular excerpt from the art song panel with Daryl Taylor and Christine Jobson. And this is featuring me singing String Stars for Pearls. And I love this excerpt because it shows how Price was finding ways both covertly and overtly to speak to the times, to make political statements, particularly anti-war political statements in this case, and how we can see Price in the context of her legacy as a performer, as a talented performer, as a talented composer, as someone who taught and mentored young Black women and further composers. So she valued her teaching and her pedagogy equally with her performing and her compositional output. And this piece just exemplifies how all of it works together in this context of Black artists and how they're able to create these new platforms and center Black voices. So this is String Stars for Pearls. So there's this whole other world of repertoire that reflects that impulse. And it's one of the things I notice is it's not as legato, so to speak. It's much more declamatory. And that's where it becomes apparent, though, that she'd studied text setting, because the more words, of course, the harder it is to set the text and make it, singable. So I'm actually going to, I guess it's my turn to share something. So I'm going to share my recording of String Stars for Pearls, which is not published. I found it at the archive, similar to Christine, and it was written, I took some notes because I'm the scholar guy, 1951 is one of her latest songs, one of the last songs she wrote, with a text by J.U. Nicholson, the author of King of the Black Isles. It's a book of poetry published in Chicago. And a lot of the themes that come up, and these themes come up in a lot of Florence Price's songs, escape, fantasy, travel to mystic worlds. He's a high romantic poet. But one of the things I noticed when I was doing this piece is that it has that parlor song, jingle-like lilt, but the text itself is very critical of war, very critical of conflict, kind of pacifist in tone. And in my mind, before knowing what time it was when she wrote it, I said, well, there must have been, one of the wars we're starting, one of the many wars we've been engaged in as a country. But this was 1951. This is Korean War is about to pop off, the Red Scare, the We Charge Genocide papers had just been presented at the UN, and those framers had been rebranded as communists. And so Florence Price is acting as the griot of her time in this piece toward the end of her life. And so I love, the reason I'm choosing this one is it's a piece that shows that these more popular idioms can still have a very political and important voice in telling us what the times were like. So I'm going to play String Stars for Pearls, if y'all would
mute yourselves. This was presented at, when I was at Georgia Southern University, we did a celebration of African American music. And I think we're going to segue to talk a little bit about working with students, but this was my recital dedicated to Florence Price. So let me pull that up.
Well, I think that.
Sorry for that.
Oh, no problem, no problem. Well, that was a snippet of String Stars for Pearls. If you weren't able to see the video all the way, you can, of course, go to the Price Fest Facebook page or go to pricefest.org /live, and you can see a full playlist of all of our live presentations from the festival. And this one was entitled The Art Songs of Florence Price. So if you search the Art Songs of Florence Price, you'll see that. I'm not sure how much time I have, but what I wanted to say in my last few moments is the last possible mode of entry that Florence Price might provide for us as thinkers and as we move forward with talking is Florence Price troubles so many narratives of the myth of white genius in classical music. She challenges the narratives of what it means, the American sound, and what Ray Linda Brown has called sort of the the Afro-romantic sound that is very unique to Florence Price. And so these are new entryways to talk about the construction of what Black American musical aesthetics are. And finally, she troubles genre distinctions. She distinguished herself not only as a classical organist, but she also, and pianist and a composer, but she also wrote jingles and played in popular idioms as well. So as we move forward as scholars, thinkers, singers, and concert artists, we need to begin to think, how can we broaden our horizons in terms of what we talk about as genres or as art music, as Dr. Andrews suggested. And as I continue in my work with Florence Price Fest and as it grows and develops, we are looking at initiatives that will create new pathways for Black female composers to have access to these platforms and to have a centralized voice in the American musical landscape. And we are also looking for ways to hold organizations accountable who have said that they want to diversify their repertoire and decolonize the way they teach. We're looking for modalities to hold them accountable as an organization and to provide educational resources like graded repertoire lists, publication resources, and the like, so that there's no longer the excuse that we didn't have access or we don't know where to find it or that we didn't know. We want to make sure that there are support systems, educational resources, and pipelines that open up new pathways for Black women to have their voice and to finally be centralized in our discourses of American music. And with that, I'll end my talk. I'm sure there are so many other things I could talk about, but thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter, for that very, very fine presentation. I'm sorry we had a bit of a technical difficulty, at least on my receiving end, for your excerpt, but hopefully all of us will get a chance to go online and get a chance to hear and see you. You have raised some very important questions that we hope we'll be able to come back to at the end of our conversation, but it's really remarkable the way in which much of the present scholarship is really starting to include a different set of voices. And you noted bell hooks and others. So we're taking a second look at those who already had a place, but we're reevaluating the place. So you raise an important question, not only about inclusion, how do we bring these people out of the margins into the center like a Price, but I think also our challenge will be to create a criteria once they're in the center of how do we critically evaluate their contribution. So with the work that you're doing and others, I look forward to what's next. So thank you very much. I want to move us right along because we have so much wonderful work to do today to introduce all of you to Ashley Gordon. Ashley is co-founder and artistic executive director and violist of Castle of Our Skins, a Boston-based concert and educational series devoted to celebrating Black artistry through music. In recognition of her work, she has presented at Ideas, UMass Boston Conference, and 180 Degrees Music Festival in Bulgaria, has been featured in the International Musician and Improper Bostonian magazines, as well as the Boston Globe, and was awarded the 2016 Charles Walton Diversity Advocate Award from the American Federations of Musicians. She is a 2015 St. Bolthoff Emerging Artist Award recipient, a 2019 Brother Thomas Fellow, and a nominee for the 2020 Americans for the Arts Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities. She has a fascinating history and bio. Her performance history itself has great international import, and I'm so excited that we're getting a chance to hear from her, both as musician, but also as influencer and really transformative artist working in the community. She's quite involved in education, and I think she's creating a part of that new landscape that's going to help a new globalism, literally, through your work. Ashley, we welcome you today, and we're delighted that you could join us. I give you now Ashley Gordon, co-founder and artistic executive director of the Castle of Our Skins.
Thank you so much, Dwight, for that introduction, and Marquise for your work and your presentation. I have seen some of the Florence Price Festival, and certainly hope and look forward to another in-person festival for that. Thank you also, Dr. Louise Toppin and University of Michigan for this platform. I'm excited to be here today. In thinking about the sort of premise of this, Black Art, Life, Music, and Demand for Justice, a lot of various overlaps and points came up for me as I was thinking about this. One of which was this beautifully messy and powerful mingling between expressions that has already happened and is continuing to happen within art music. So Samuel Coleridge Taylor, looking back in history, studying the poetry of Paul Laurence Dunbar, Margaret Bonds, studying the poetry of Langston Hughes, Robert Owens, studying the poetry of Countee Cullen, and not having a sort of either or a stratification, but really trying to marry arts and expressions within those arts together. Thinking also in opera, which combines, yes, music and text as well as movement and other expressions. There have been countless examples of Black presence and Black excellence, from Chevalier de Saint-Georges, who wrote 6 operas in the 1700s, to Scott Joplin and his grand opera Treemonisha in the late 1800s, Grant Still, who wrote 9 in the early 1900s, and certainly this year's Pulitzer Prize winner, Anthony Davis, for his Central Park 5. So there has been, again, this history and so much richness that has combined and sort of transcended a particular movement or particular moment in time to really marry and blend so many different kinds of expressions, yes, related to justice and politics, as well as arts and expression in and of themselves. Thinking also with the civil rights and the certain the extension that we have today with politics and protests. There have been spirituals, right, that have been adapted, the lyrics changed and adapted to become protest songs. So keep your hands on the plow turning into keep your eyes on the prize. And thinking about that makes me really just think about spirituals in and of themselves, which hold, without any sort of reinterpretation or adaptation, hold so much resistance, so much solidarity, ancestry, strength, that hearing a performance, thinking again historically, Roland Hayes, H.D. Burleigh in the turn of the 20th century, to a performance today is still a hugely powerful reminder of that strength and of that resiliency, and is one that really touches into and transcends time and transcends space and transcends certain political moments, I feel. Also in that same vein, I'm reminded of the Negro National Anthem, which continues to come back in various instrumentations and orchestrations and arrangements across generations. That also is something that is an anchor point where we can call upon for strength. And specifically, I remember a powerful improvised version of the Negro National Anthem performed as an encore by jazz saxophonist James Carter. He had just performed really this passionate and captivating performance of Roberto Sierra's Concerto for Saxophones and Orchestra in Boston's Symphony Hall last March. And that concert was historic in the sense that it featured works exclusively by African diasporic composers, most of whom, for the first time ever, have been performed on that stage. And not only was the concert an amazing an expression of excellence in artistry and presence, but that encore was an amazing expression and testament to our resiliency. Also, in thinking about the sort of theme for this panel today and also this weekend celebration, I'm reminded of really overt examples of art life mixing with politics and calls for justice. So the 2016 work 7 Last Words for the Unarmed by Joel Thompson, who I know is certainly well known for your audiences in Michigan, as well as the string quartet works of, and other works obviously by Daniel Bernard Romain, his string quartet works, King, Powell, Angelou, Parks, in dedication for MLK, Colin Powell, Maya Angelou, and Rosa Parks. So there's in classical music and art music this marriage that we see now, but certainly thinking about music in general, I would also say, if it's not as overt as having a piece titled after a certain civil rights leader, our sheer presence, and I think Marquise had touched on this as well, our sheer presence is an act of revolution, right? It's not necessarily associated with a particular moment of time or political event, but our very existence is our ancestors' wildest dreams. Our expression and participation in this field is something to be acknowledged and to be celebrated. And again, thinking back in history, I'm reminded of way back in history, John Blank, a black trumpeter in King Tudor's 16th century court, and the laundry list of African Americans named in James Trotter's Music and Some Highly Musical People, and ethnomusicologist Maud Cunillare's Negro Musicians and Their Music, just a Rolodex of excellence. Each of those names seemingly defying expectation, especially in this country, to be able to excel in this field. And it's, for me, all the more powerful as a 21st century musician to know that there is not I am not an anomaly. I very much am centered and resting on so much contribution and so much excellence and so much persistence within this field, whether or not the optics of the field represent that, but there is this deep history and legacy that we can build on and draw upon as we move forward. So I also think about, too, in the with respects to this field as it relates to race and also as it relates to gender that Marquise had referenced. Florence Price, in her famous letter to Stokowski, had referenced her two handicaps, race and sex, but wanting to be marked and known for her music, and that in and of itself is an example of going against, right, being an advocate, being a promoter, and standing up for oneself, an act of resilience. Certainly as it relates to her student, also Margaret Bonds, being a Black woman composer in the early 1900s, her very presence being one that is revolutionary in this field. So while in thinking again about the theme, very specific events and very specific music being attached to it, for me, our sheer presence as it relates to history in this field is an act of revolution and one to very much be celebrated. I had two small performances I wanted to share, but since we already heard a little bit of Florence Price, I think I'll share a little bit about Margaret Bonds. And this is, I think, appropriate for the nature of this particular weekend, with so much expression and so much scholarship around vocal art music by Black composers. This is a performance of Margaret Bonds' The Negro Speaks of Rivers, a song originally for voice and piano, setting the poetry of Langston Hughes, and it's performed by myself and pianist Joy Klein-Finney. And I think it speaks very specifically, and then also in this grander sense, about ancestry and strength and resilience. So I would love to listen to this performance, this performance being one of many performances that my organization, co-founded with Anthony Green, who we'll hear from, I believe, next, Castle of Our Skins, performs to be able to highlight and showcase and celebrate that rich legacy that is Black excellence in classical music. the last thing that I'll say is just a little bit about Castle of Our Skins. And as a concert and educational series now in our 8th season, I think we try to do what Marquise is also advocating for, which is the canonization of these composers. Through concerts, through educational workshops, through commissioning, collaborations, many other initiatives. And it is a project that grew very earnestly, similar, I think, also to Marquise, sort of realizing there's a work that you didn't know about, and then going down the many rabbit holes, literally blowing on the surface, and there's a world underneath, not even a deep excavation to be able to find so much music, and one that is really continually exciting for research purposes, performing purposes, to present and highlight as many composers that we have to credit our foothold right now as 21st century musicians being in this field. So it's very much a labor of love to be able to lead this organization along with Anthony Green and present a wide variety of music from African diasporic composers.
Thank you so much, Ashley, both for your artistry and for your advocacy. It's so exciting to hear the depth of perspective from you. And I can't wait till we talk with one another about our respective works. But you really raised and called to mind certain very important questions that I think are really at the heart and center of what we're doing today. So thank you so much. And please continue to do what you're doing. Keep on doing it. The music was lovely, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go ahead now and get a chance to chat with your colleague, Anthony Green, who is a composer, performer, and social justice artist whose various creative and pedagogical projects have been presented in more than 25 countries in venues such as Jordan Hall in Boston, Tiffany in Vredenburg, Utrecht, the Netherlands, Spike Gallery in Berlin, the Israel Conservatory of Music in Tel Aviv, and the Shoe Factory in Cyprus, and the Symphony Space, Spectrum, and Marian Anderson Hall, of course, in New York City. A former McKnight visiting composer, Green has been invited to numerous residencies in the United States and Europe. He is also the co-founder and associate director of Boston-based Castle of Our Skins, dedicated to celebrating Black artistry through music. And Anthony, I hope you will tell us what Castle of Our Skins, what that name is derived from in your presentation at the beginning or the end. I welcome now Anthony Green, great composer and great person. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, thank you so very much. Firstly, I want to answer your question. Castle of Our Skins comes from a poem by Nikki Giovanni called Poem for Nina, as in Nina Simone. And the first line is, "We are all imprisoned in the castle of our skins, and some of us have said, so be it." And she goes on to talk about celebrating the very skin that you're in. With that, I want to thank Louise for sending me this invitation to be a part of this. I want to thank everybody involved in this event and all of the events throughout this celebration. I, of course, want to give a major shout out to Ash for being my partner in crime, supporting me, and just being amazing in everything that you do. And I want to wish a big happy birthday to Willis Patterson. So with that, I will start my little bit crazy talk. And I will begin it by saying Beethoven was Black. Yes, Beethoven was Black. This is a conversation that has sparked yet again. And I recently read an article in The Guardian by Philip Clark, who talks about how Samuel Coleridge Taylor actually started this inquiry. He recognized features on paintings of Beethoven that matched his own features. He, of course, being a mixed race composer, his father from Sierra Leone and his mother from the UK. And he started this inquiry into Beethoven's heritage and uncovered various different facts about Beethoven, and eventually started to pique the interest of many other people who also started to question whether or not Beethoven was Black. This phrase then reached Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X in the civil rights movement, who used Beethoven was Black as a rallying cry in their work. And I actually didn't really know about this until I read this article today. And I thought that this was an ingenious tool to use during the civil rights movement. Now, it honestly doesn't matter whether or not Beethoven was Black, because the thing is, Beethoven could have been Black. And if Beethoven were Black, it wouldn't have limited the quality of his music. What ends up happening with many people who get shook by the very concept that Beethoven could have been Black is that they have to start to change the way they think about Beethoven, and they don't realize the racism that goes into play when they get so nervous about the possibility of a Beethoven being Black. Today, we have the same old problems of programming that we've had for the past 500 years, right? Despite the increasing conversations about equity that have risen over the past 5 to 10 years, and definitely over the past 6 months after the brutal murdering of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Black people. I continually look out for young Black composers just to see what type of music they're creating and see whether or not the music that they do write will fit not only with Castle of Our Skins, but in my own programming as an individual performer. And I'm seeing this incredible trend of Black composers embracing contemporary techniques fearlessly and being embraced by the new music community in ways that I never experienced when I was their age. Consequently, now that I'm in this generation that's in between the student composers that I find and the older, more experienced professionals, I feel a moral obligation to make these younger composers know that I'm here to uplift them in ways that I can, and also to be a platform for them to complain about situations that they've experienced, to ask advice from me, or just to connect and to feel part of something bigger than themselves. As social media is making it so much easier to create communities, to find composers of color, to check in on each other and support each other in ways that we can, reaching out can be incorporated into weekly or daily routines. And reaching out will reveal some incredible composers, such as composers who are using more traditional and accessible approaches like Quinn Mason, Kevin Day, Brittany Boykin, Lauren McCall, Nyla Nombeko, and on and on and on. Brianna Ware, Evan Williams, Sean Okpebolo, I can go on. And then there are composers who I mentioned before who are embracing contemporary techniques. So Jesse Cox, who embraces spectral music and contemporary electronic techniques. Corey Rose Suma, a young French-Canadian composer who's experimenting with new ways of sound production. Wynton Kelly Stoneguess, who's cutting bold sound worlds, has an international environment reflective of his own travels. Diana Wallace, who's slowly finding her voice and working really hard in doing so in her beautiful compositions. Marcus Norris, who comes from a hip-hop background and blends these worlds together. Brittany Green, recently commissioned by the Jack Quartet. Matthew Shoemaker, recent MLK MIT visiting scholar who focuses on live electronic processes. Yaz Lancaster, a non-binary Black composer incorporating music theater and contemporary popular music idioms. Forbes Graham, exploring mathematical processes in music. Montati Masebe, fusing South African tradition with Western classical approaches. Sakari Dixon, currently growing in her experimentation with electronics and tonality and atonality. Shannon C., exploring minimal textures and electronic sound healing sessions. New Renaissance artist Elizabeth A. Baker, whose compositions have such a wide range, and her practice includes field recording, literature, sound production, toy piano, so much more. Sarah Piton, whose compositions are on the boundary of music and visual art, and whose practice fuses complex philosophical theories that comment on contemporary society. Jessica Mays, whose unique sound world blends contemporary techniques with raw singer-songwriter sounds and spatial considerations. And I can go on and on and on with the amount of young composers who I come across on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and who I try to reach out to form a community. With that, my compositional practice incorporates a wide variety of styles, from music for children, opera, music theater, and text-based pieces. One of my friends, Christy Finn, is in this session today, and she performed one of my more experimental pieces expertly with her duo Noise Bridge, and I can't thank her enough. Open forms, I experiment with that, avant-garde, gritty pieces, and now film works since COVID has hit. And it's only been recently that I've started to explore my own Black and queer intersectional identities in my music, and I've been supported by various communities in these endeavors. However, I'd like to leave you all with a clip from my most recent orchestral piece, which was originally a work commissioned by Castle of Our Skins. The orchestration of the third movement of this work, which is originally for flute, viola, and cello, which Ash, of course, played perfectly. This orchestration was done by request from the Venezuelan flutist and conductor Orlando Sella. And the clip that you're about to see is from the recent American Composers Orchestra's annual Earshot Underwood readings. The piece is called Peace Till We Meet Again. And this clip that you'll see is from what was called the last gig in New York before the pandemic took over. And I'm super fortunate to have been able to experience this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That list of younger composers is very provocative, and hopefully at the end of our conversation, you can help us find these composers that you're encountering daily, weekly, monthly, and the rest of it, so that we can all be enlightened. It was a quite lovely piece as well, so thank you for your music as well as for your insights. Beloved, I want to move quickly because I want us to have some time to chat, and a lot of important ideas have been already kind of shared. So I want to introduce you to our last panelist, who indeed needs no introduction, Dr. Bill Banfield. Bill served as professor and director of Africana Studies at Berklee College of Music. He taught in the college from 2005 until his retirement. Unbelievably, he has retired and was recently named a professor emeritus for his service to the institution. Bill is, in his own right, a Renaissance man. He's an author, he's a composer, he's a performer, he's a provocateur, and he is an advocate of the music, keeping many musical communities afloat all at the same time. In 2002, he was the W.E.B. Du Bois Fellow at Harvard University and was appointed by Toni Morrison herself to serve as the visiting Atelier professor at Princeton in 2003. Bill has served as a judge on the Pulitzer Prize Committee for Music for 3 times, and that is quite unusual. And his symphonies have been performed throughout symphonic orchestra communities in the United States. He's a native of Detroit and received his bachelor's degree from New England, a Master of Theological Studies at BU, and a DMA in composition at the University of Michigan. He studied with T.J. Anderson, George Russell, Bill Bolcom, and Bill Albright. And he has authored 6 books, essays of all types on arts and cultural criticism, history and biography, and he is a pretty extraordinary force in the world of contemporary music. So we want to welcome now Dr. Bill Banfield to the stage. Bill, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Big Brother Dwight. Am I on? Is everything okay? I know in this new world of technology, we are often challenged, speaking of challenging. So I'm assuming everything's okay, but thank you, Big Brother Dwight. And hello to everybody that's out there for joining. We're very, very excited to share these ideas. I want to thank my dear colleagues who appeared as well, shaping our discourse as we move forward. And happy birthday to Big Brother Dean Willis Patterson, who Dwight and Louise and the others who are here gathered. We could not be here if it wasn't for the mentoring and the love and the great counsel that Dr. Patterson, and I'm old enough now to call him Willis. Happy birthday, Willis. Thank you so much to Louise, who is our dear colleague and sister, for her incredible light for leading us forward in so many of these things. Black art matters. Black lives matter. All lives matter. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it is also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom like art. And that's from Toni Morrison writing, No Place for Self-Pity, No Room for Fear. Very powerful words for us today. I'm particularly interested in our discussions of marginalized concert artists who are people of color and discuss the importance of our narratives as modern creative peoples, wanting to dismantle ours and others' perception of victimization by focusing on, as our colleagues have done already, how we are actually activating, programming, or the distribution of our creative shares that we're in places that we do this and the spaces that we do it in. One common theme in these dark COVID days is how Black lives matter or not to us, and how we relate, care, or care not about Black creative invisibility, or the definition or control of our identities in contemporary modern life. I'm still convinced that the status quo view is Black people or people of color are invisible and irrelevant. I'm sure we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm not spending a lot of energy these days on trying to please anyone in that way. I don't care about that anymore, actually. What I care about is the quality of the connections I'm making within the musical spheres I'm fortunate enough to occupy. John Coltrane said, "This is a big, beautiful universe we live in that's been given to us. And here's an example of how magnificent and encompassing it is. To share this, that's one of the greatest things we can do in our lives. To do this in some way, that's the musician's way, is through their music." It's clear that the models of music exceptionalism, as many of our panelists have talked about, are to be found in the entire history and culture of Black artists and Black music and Black artistry and culture, from the spirituals to hip hop and contemporary. Because of the functional nature of African diasporic traditions and American creative tapestry, an impactful narrative emerges of innovative, spiritual values-based original music and social music that shaped the new world. Black music is a great model of artistic citizenry from these African roots, which exemplify a broad range of social cultural achievement. This is what students see when confronted with the importance of learning these traditions more deeply. I think several of our panelists talked about the notion of not only cultural programming in the marketplace, but institutional programming. In terms of my art, more than anything, is that there is a need today at this time for serious conversations about music and culture that our students need to benefit from. I'm convinced that when these are combined through curriculum in history and culture, linking of students, faculty members with Black music, with the general public, and these shared beliefs of cultural programming, this promotes excellence and aspiration that, again, all of our colleagues talked about. And we should, as Dwight has invited us, talk more about this. George Lewis put it this way recently, a dear colleague of all of ours: you have to look for people who support you rather than looking for why people don't. And what matters is expanding our identities and the positioning we have to hold that power in the world. I love that because it's not about victimization. It's empowering and contemporary and spiritually grounded to think of ourselves as expanded identities placed here for purpose. We just have to name it and claim it. In these contemporary discussions and discourses, we are focused on forwarding new faces of our faith and our culture. And we're focused now on what it means to be people to be reckoned with. So Black artistry and culture always raises this resolve and this representation, which fuel composing, representation narratives, and the doingness. I have seen that the cultivation of these value sets have allowed people to aspire beyond and provide an essential view of what's critically human, what's critically spiritual, what's intellectual, what's political, and of course, social developments, which we've been talking about. In this intersectionality, that is what drives and defines my work as a scholar right now. And as I think back of the things that have influenced me and encouraged me, those things continue to be at the center of my own praxis and pedagogy and my aesthetic. I believe postmodern thinkers from my generation and beyond, that's everyone today, and from our group that has been talking, the post-civil rights groups have a unique positioning to claim, which has to do with the cross sections of modern popular media and culture, technology, classic canon training, and beyond. And then further, what's been talked about, I call the Obama emergence of intersectionality of ethnicity, identity, class, power, gender, global cultural perspectives, and the arts politics of hip hop all push the boundaries of cultural experiences and expressions not before experienced in prior generations. Arts always is the active barometer and a vehicle we step in and to ride and ride. Several great thinkers and artists have recently inspired me in these dark days of COVID and social challenges. James Baldwin, where in the great debate at Oxford, he said, "The Negro grows through the meal, yet comes out on the other side knowing we are considered less than human, even though we have triumphed to make it through the test of existence. The proof of our humanity is that survival." In Toni Morrison's document film that you can see today, and we just lost, as you know, The Pieces of Me, she examined in her life the exemplary dedication to the power of words, ideas, lives, living perspectives, and the role of creating and disseminating these kinds of thoughts and culture, the stories and the characters that define human character. For me, all lives matter in creative universes. So the question, dear colleagues, should be, do you have the craft, the chops, the perspectives, and the distinctive creative voice that will be around and be sustainable and translatable through all of these sometimes momentary upsurges of social upheavals that connect to a continuous amount of disruption for sure. But I think artists want to talk about, does your art speak in these ways that are sustainable through the waves of this? And will our art be there when the people regain their senses and come to see the beauty, the angst, and the wonder in your art? Just as a colleague, I want to put that forward, something that we could talk about. And I'm looking now at my time, and I want to make sure we have not gone over this 9 minutes. I have a 3-minute section from one of my works, recent works, which is Symphony 12, and it's based on a letter that Langston Hughes is writing to Carlos Van Vechten about a recent trip he and his buddy had just taken to Cuba. And myself and Louise Toppin and others, we took TJ Anderson, a number of artists, Issei Barnwell. I've gone 7 times in the last 2 or 3 years to take the music of music of American Black culture to Cuba. And this piece was written and premiered just last year. And I want to share it with you. Called Charming, by the way.
The Cape is charming, full of old ruins from the old days of the French, piercing to the sea by the It's much colder $25 a month. Oh, the native crew from the ship I took at Santiago. If here at the Cape we have plenty of friends, take us to Campos and Confides, dances and bars, and out on the game and fishing boats, and we're walking to the road to dance this Saturday. We got touch, we all dance, singing the
Bill, that was beautiful. Who was the soprano?
I'll have to look at the program notes. I can't remember right now, but she is wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have so many performances. It's hard to keep track. I understand. Listen, colleagues, I want to be mindful of our hour, and we have had some questions to come in. I don't know that we'll be able to have the kind of conversation and dialogue amongst ourselves in the amount of time that we have left. And I do need to turn this back over to Louise so that she can give us our further marching orders. But I might ask that we figure out a way to continue this conversation offline, not only with each other, but with our participants who have been on the call today. And maybe Louise can give us some suggestions about that. We simply won't be able to go into all of the wonderful issues that have been raised. In the interest of time, I want to take a moment to thank our colleagues, though, Marquise Carter, Ashley Gordon, Anthony Green, and Dr. Bill Banfield. To all of you, your input and your artistry and your advocacy is very, very important. And I'm very much encouraged by the next generation of hard work that will be done on your watch. I'm not nearly as pessimistic as I have been at certain moments in my recent career. I would like to ask just one question, though. Many of you have described very successful advocacy roles outside of the academy. And I want to raise the issue before this session is over. What is the role of the academy in the midst of this advocacy for more inclusion, for more diversity? You've all been very successful around the world, but not necessarily in a school or in a conservatory. And I'd love to get some of your, just your reflection on the role of the academy at this transformational moment.
Well, I can go ahead.
I'll speak so I can get out of the way and let, as you said, Dwight, the younger scholars talk. I'm retired, as you know, and I have taught I've taught at 40 colleges and universities, been tenured at 3 in the last one that I was named emeritus. So I only say that to answer just your question. I've always been involved in curriculum development. And the last curriculum development we did, we were able to change with our colleagues the very definition of the school's standing, which is that our school is dedicated to music in the African diaspora. And it took 1 decade to do that at Berkeley recently, and to change the curriculum so that it's required for every student to take these courses in Black music, which includes the music of Black composers. So we're very proud of that. But every place I've been as director of cultural studies at University of St. Thomas, the same thing. We took about 5 years to change that. I'm currently at the Smithsonian now, and everybody is doing this. So your work that you raised on this question, Dwight, is very important. All of the colleagues talked about institutional changes. And so I think at the academic institution, they are really looking at this thing and addressing things. So thank you for raising that question, Dwight. It's very important.
Thank you. Marquise, could each of you give me a sentence or so, just some feedback, as you've been very successful at this, and I want to get your input. Yes, Marquise, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. I would agree with Dr. Banfield that curriculum development is a huge piece of it, and as evidenced by Philip Ewell's recent talk at SMT and the following fallout, it is long overdue. We need to be asking, why are we teaching figured bass still? We need to be asking why, and we need to be revisiting our program student-centered learning objectives. As someone who is very passionate about that, our objectives have been based on what our teachers taught us, and we need to revisit what young musicians need to be successful in the future, and we need to be teaching toward the future of what we want our field to look like, and that looks like culturally, globally aware musical citizens that learn musical skills that build into that future. And so there are a lot of ways that looks, but we have to start with, I'm always talking about the big idea. What is the big idea? What does a student in 4 years at Murray State need to come out knowing how to do and knowing how to think about, or how to question? What questions should they be asking? And so that's what I'm trying to do in my courses, and I know we're going through a big redesign in my department as well, trying to decolonize our music history courses so that they are, even in their nomenclature, changing, and so that it's not necessarily chronological, but that it might be oriented to different thematic ideas or to different roles that the modern day musician might play into. So that's what my short answer is.
Thank you. Anthony, because we only have a couple minutes, but I want to hear from you. Go ahead.
Definitely. So I've had the honor of being a guest composer at around 20 institutions. And outside of those institutions, people know me for this article that I wrote in New Music Box called What the Optics of New Music Say to Black Composers. And that has given me the opportunity to speak also in festivals like the New Music Gathering, with this Women on Verge festival, with the Wellesley Composers Conference. And while all of these things are external festivals for new music composers, they are all linked to academia as well. As you all know, after George Floyd, many institutions came out and said, we want to program at least one piece by a Black composer on every concert. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's great. Well, why don't you go further than that? Why don't you just have a whole season of Black composers, right? And in my speeches, when I'm invited, I always try to push the bar. I'm also now a visiting faculty at the University of Hartford, and I have all of my students listening to pieces by Black composers every week. And I talk about these issues, I talk about the disparities, and I'm trying as much as I possibly can to push those boundaries. And I just hope everyone, of course, will do that, no matter what race or cultural background you are.
Thank you, Anthony. Ashley, we'll give you the last word, and then I've got to turn it over to Louise.
Yeah, I would definitely echo with Anthony about the advocacy and thinking along the lines that if everyone did something, we as a society would just be so much further along. And really questioning and challenging the motivation. So is it to be faddish, or is it to really enact something that is not going to be the next cycle 25 years from now, where we have a Black Lives Matter conversation and panel like this? I'm also reminded about, speaking of advocacy, the Associated Board of Royal School of Music, which affects 650,000 students in 90 countries, with what is what concerto, what sonata, what piece would be acceptable to perform at an audition. And their piano listing that had not a single Black composer in it. They have out of the I can't even remember how many thousands of titles, a very, very minuscule amount of Black composers. Thinking of an institution that has such a reach like that, it's so hugely important on such a large scale for institutions to be at the head, right, and help as a sort of trickle down effect to really present and set the bar high. Whereas you have the Price Festival and Castle of Our Skins, other grassroots organizations that are doing the work. We need both and in order to really make sure that the effort is there and the intentionality and the longevity.
It's a perfect way to turn this back to Louise, the both and the and of it. I want to thank our panelists for their rich conversation and presentations. You all are very, very much inspiring. So I thank you all for that. I also want to take a moment just to thank Louise Toppin, who is a force of nature. This would not be possible were it not for her energy, discipline, and vision. And this is always game changing. When she convenes us all, there's a conversation that would not happen otherwise. And so I just want to take the time to acknowledge that. And I want to say one sentence and then I'll give it to you, Louise. Part of Willis's vision was that he was doing the both and actually. He was working not only within the academy, but he was coming down to the Detroit high schools to recruit us to the University of Michigan, which seemed to be a million miles away, not just 45 miles away. And he was doing things like Our Own Thing, where all of us as undergraduates were in a little funky church in Ann Arbor teaching young kids about music. And that in itself was revolutionary because it taught us as very young conservatory students that we had a moral responsibility to pass it on. And for me, 50 years, 60 years later, we never forget that sense of connectedness that you all are describing. So to Willis, happy birthday, but also thank you, thank you, thank you. Louise, I give it back to you now.
Thank you so much. And thank you all. I cannot thank you enough for this wonderful conversation, which I do hope we will continue. Just because we run out of time with each of the panels that we've had, there is no reason that we cannot convene again if you are willing and continue the conversation and record it and present it. Daryl Taylor put in the chat, he's suggesting the Art Song Alliance would be a place, their Facebook page for discussion. And as Dwight said, one of the many things I think about Willis Patterson is that he was exemplifying engaged scholarship before any of us knew the word in the academy, before it existed. And so I think that you all are perfect examples of what that is, both inside and outside of the academy. I would like to let the last word come from Jean Snyder, who put something in the chat that I want to share with you all. And she said, this has been true for every session this weekend. Thank you for your stimulating, inspiring, challenging contributions through your words, your music, your insights. Thank you more than I can say. So I think she said phenomenal. I think that sort of sums up what I've experienced as I've witnessed each of the sessions and each of you individually as I'm watching us continue to thrive. Those of us in the senior level and those of us in the junior level who are coming behind us and replacing us, as should be. I just keep letting everybody know, come on, somebody, you're replacing me. I'm going to join Bill soon, as soon as the ranks of Bill. So thank you again, Dwight, for a wonderful moderation and the whole panel. I just wanted to let us know the last session starts at 4:00, and it is, it's a little different than all the other sessions in that it is a chance for more of the community and all the many organizations that Willis Patterson was influential working with. It gives them an opportunity to give words and expressions of congratulations and greeting in their own way. And it'll be kind of fascinating. I didn't post the list of people intentionally so you could see how I had to limit it to a certain number of people just to get a few words of tribute from all of the dimensions of his incredible life that he is still living with us. So come back at 4, join us for that. And then we have a drive-by reception. I have a caterer who we worked carefully to do a socially distanced drive-by reception after it all. So those who are in Ann Arbor, please join us, and I will give you the address then for us to do that in the chat on the next one. But before we go, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you, and goodbye all. Thank you. Great job. Great job.
Thank you, Dwight.
Much. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It was awesome. Have a good night.
You too. Oh, I know it's late where you are.
A little bit. I'm going to eat dinner.
Happy birthday from Charcy and
James
Sawyer. Well, you always said you put us together. We met at the University of Michigan, and every time that we go to that little pond and we're at the School of Music, we think about the wonderful times that we spent together. And I actually remember the first time I met you at Dana School of Music when you did this absolutely wonderful recital. And I had never seen a person that looked like me, of